Goodyear City Council, October 27, 2008. All items listed are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. All members of council are in attendance. We have one item on our agenda, and that's the all-mail ballot elections. And Lynn Mulhall will lead that. Lynn?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. First, I will clarify that by all mail, I mean M-A-I-L and not M-A-L-E.
I'm so glad you said that.
It's scary that in 2008
Someone asked.
you have to clarify that.
This subject has been debated extensively, and most people have an opinion one way or the other, whether they approve of it or they don't. Some people think it's a great idea and they use it, but they would rather stick with the traditional method. So tonight I will review some of the pros and cons and hopefully give you enough information so that when I'm done you can give me direction if you would like to have our March 2009 election as an all-mail ballot election. State statutes allow us to hold an all-mail ballot election, and more cities and towns in Arizona are tending to switch over from the traditional ballot election to an all-mail ballot for reasons that I will go over. The figures really speak for themselves. Those cities and towns that have the all-mail ballot, their voter participation increases immensely. Look at Payson. They went from 8% to 62% voter participation, which is wonderful. I decided to go back and do some checking from our elections, and actually we weren't too bad. Back in 2003, our March primary election, we actually had a pretty good turnout. We had 25.09%, which for us lately, that's pretty remarkable. And then the voter turnout for the bond election, the bond and city charter election we had in September of 2004, we climbed even higher to 29.6%. But in the 2005 March primary, we dropped to 14%, and then in our 2007 primary, we dropped to 3%, which is terrible. And it's embarrassing to tell people that we only have a 3% turnout. 2007.
That's when we only had 3 candidates running.
Right.
There was none.
Yeah, nobody
Right.
cared about
Nobody cared about it.
Right.
But still,
It was still dismal.
yes.
Still dismal.
We
But
currently,
you needed to say that. That is important.
it is,
You had 3 people running
3
for 3
seats.
billets.
Right. And it is
It's hotly
important.
contested, Mayor. Hotly contested.
But the mayor race 2 years prior to that was still
That's a
Not-
waste of interest.
right. We currently contract with the Maricopa County for our election services, and the process on an all-mail ballot election is really very simple. It doesn't really affect the way my job or the city clerk department's job. It doesn't make it easier to have an all-mail ballot, but there are other reasons. And what the county does is 33 days before the election, they mail out the ballots to all the registered voters in Goodyear. And the mailing is done by first-class mail. There are printed instructions inside, and there's a postage-paid envelope to return the ballot to the county elections department. After the voter receives his ballot, he or she can vote at their leisure, take their time to read some material, and then they have a choice. They can return the ballot in the postage-paid envelope, they can drop it off at City Hall, or they can take it to one of the other county elections departments that's a drop-off site. So if the council approves this, we will still use City Hall as an early voting site for those 30 days before the election, and people can come in and drop off their ballots at the same place that people have been voting. We will post a list of drop-off sites on our website. We will be very proactive. We'll try to get out and educate the public to what this means in our city, since we've not done it before. The process is very secure. Signatures are checked, ballots are logged out, and they're logged back in. And it's important to point out that confidentiality is not compromised at all. I had some questions at the Gain booth. Our department had a booth at the Gain event, and several people stopped by and asked election questions, most of them for the November election. They're not really thinking about our election yet, but one gentleman was concerned that if he requested an early ballot and mailed it in, and then he went to the polls and tried to vote again, how would they know that he'd already voted? Well, if your name is on the early voting list and you go to a polling site, you have to vote a provisional ballot, which means that they are going to do everything they need to do to make sure that that person only voted once. So that's the protection there.
So it's actually like a red flag to them, the type of ballot that they would be voting on. So.
And there are, some people who are requesting early ballot, they may lose their ballot or spoil it, and they think they can go to the polls and vote, and their vote would be counted, but that provisional ballot, then the county would make an effort to compare, okay, the person was mailed a ballot, but they never returned it, so we're going to void that ballot, and we're going to take the ballot that they made at the polling site.
Lynn, let's assume that an individual votes by mail, okay? And somewhere along the line, some candidate has convinced him that he might have voted the wrong way. How can he change his vote?
He can't.
He can't.
Right. Now, the cost is a factor in the decision. Holding our March primary as a traditional polling place, which they call a ground election, it would cost us approximately $34,000. It is difficult, if not impossible, to have an exact amount because it's a moving target. At the time I wrote the COAC, we had just over 9,000 people on the permanent early voting list. So whether those people want to vote at the polls or by ballot, they are going to get mailed a ballot, and we are charged for that ballot. So in the meantime, additional people could make a request to be put on that list, or they may just make a request for an early ballot. They don't want to be on the permanent list, but yet they're not going to be in town, or for some other reason, they're going to request an early ballot. And that has the same price as the ballots were charged for the permanent early voting list, which is $1.72. All of the registered voters, we pay 73 cents per registered voter. So that's on top of that permanent early voting. If we go to an all-mail ballot, then we're just charged the $1.72. And I don't mean just, it's still a lot of money. But we don't pay that double fee because it's only one type of election. It's an all-mail ballot. So every registered voter would get that ballot. The percentages I shared with you on a few earlier slides prove that it increases voter participation. Those who prefer this type of election argue that they avoid lines at the polls. I recently read an article in the newspaper, and I don't remember in what city or town it was, where the story was about a couple that stood online for over 3 hours to vote by ballot, which is pretty amazing. Voting at home eliminates scheduling problems and transportation issues. Considering the price of gas today, that's probably a pro in favor of having an all-mail ballot. It also eliminates the worry of arriving at the polling place and not having the proper ID, because now we require the different types of ID before someone's allowed to vote, even if you're on the registration list. And if you go to the polls and you don't have that proper ID with you, again, you vote a provisional ballot, and then it's your responsibility as a voter to either come to City Hall or another designated place, a verification site, where you bring in those pieces of identification to prove you are who you say you are. So voting by mail eliminates that. Other arguments in favor include time to be better prepared. Voters can read material, take their time, talk to their family, friends, talk to the candidates, and make their vote. So security is much better in an all-mail ballot election because everything is checked, the logging in, the verifications. And probably one of the best reasons for the county is it helps them clean up their voter registration lists, which also benefit us because we pay for every registered voter, whether they still live in that house or not. If they haven't changed their residency, we're still charged for that ballot. So it helps them because there are no return, they're not allowed to forward. On the envelope, it says, "Do not forward." So those are returned to the county, and that enables them to clean up their list. Considering the high number of foreclosures we have and people moving, that would probably make a big difference this year in helping to clean up the lists. But there are those who don't favor an all-mail ballot, and some of them argue the cost is higher, which it is, but the amount is questionable as more and more people vote, get on that list, on the permanent early voting list, and request an early ballot. Probably the biggest reason some people don't like it is it breaks a very long-standing tradition. I've been voting by mail for many, many elections, but I still remember when I used to go to the polling site and stand online and visit with friends and neighbors and coworkers, and it was a special event. It was wonderful, but those times have changed. Another valid argument is the voter who receives the ballot in the mail, and they're so anxious to vote, they vote it and they mail it, as you were saying, Councilmember Sousa. And then 2 days later or 3 days later, election material is delivered in the mail, and they wonder, did they vote properly? But I think with education and as we do more and more of the mail ballots, the voters will understand that you can't be the eager beaver and vote the day you get your ballot, unless you've really, truly made up your mind what you want.
But don't you agree that the people who are running for office will be sending their material
Exactly.
out at the date that they know those ballots are going to be arrived?
Because the candidates are learning as well.
That's right.
Years ago, when the all-mail ballot was a new way to do things, people weren't aware of that, and so they were used to mailing them a few days before the election. So it changes many things. It's important to remember that we can only have an all-mail ballot when the county does not have an election going on. It would be very confusing to the voters if the City of Goodyear had an all-mail ballot and the county had a ballot with a polling place, because they're not allowed to do an all-mail ballot. So your voters, it would be unfair to ask them to vote one issue by mail and one issue by going to the polling place. And I think the county is probably afraid that most people would vote for the all-mail one and they wouldn't have voters show up at their site for their election. In 2003, the City of Goodyear Council voted to authorize an all-mail ballot election, and it was our general plan election. And Dee and I were both very excited to try this. And it ended up not working for us because the county ended up having an item on the ballot for that election. So we had to bring the decision back to you to ratify not to have an all-mail ballot election. But the county has told me in March they do not have anything on their ballot. We must notify the county by statute 120 days before the election if we want to have an all-mail ballot election, which is November 10th. And that is why I'm bringing this to you tonight. The county supports the all-mail ballot election for several reasons. Polling places are getting very hard to find. A lot of the schools don't want us to go in the schools anymore. It compromises their security. The Department of Justice has a lot of guidelines that it has to be handicap accessible. There's a whole list of requirements. So it is difficult for the county to find all those polling places. And I'm sure that you've seen the ads in the paper. They're still looking for workers for the November election. So it's becoming difficult for the county to find poll workers as well. Another consideration for you to think about is the distance of Mobile. Mobile will be a polling place, and we cannot get the results of our city election until those results are brought to City Hall. So that's going to delay. Normally, our results are provided to us very quickly after 8 o'clock, but waiting for Mobile will probably extend that a little bit. So if the council does authorize this, if you direct me to move forward, I will work very closely with the PIO and the newspapers to get the word out to our citizens. We still have time to make it successful, and we can educate them. And I think You're right there. Christy Pazzarelli from the Maricopa County Elections Department is here to answer any questions that you may have. Some of you may know her. She is the campaign finance queen. She probably doesn't want me to say that.
Lynn, before you leave, you show here that there are nine cities that you give these percentages on and the election, the dates or the years that they were held. How many cities and towns in the state of Arizona are applying a mail-in ballot? Do you know?
I don't know that. Do you,
I
Christy?
don't know statewide, I can only speak for the county of Maricopa, which is at 9 right now.
Just 9. And these 9, these are the 9 that you listed.
They all do it except Peoria. Peoria has that date on there because they've not been able to continue the all-mail ballot because the county always has an issue the same time that they have their elections. They would love to have an all-mail ballot. And when they have the opportunity, they will.
And these cities that are applying all-mail ballots are very small in size compared to Goodyear.
No, Peoria is
Peoria, that's
not small.
Already surprised now.
Surprise,
Just those two. The others are
yeah, others are small. The Surprise loves it. They're doing it again for their election.
I have a question of logistics, actually. One of the reasons that when I was first reading this, was a little concerned was truly that loss of tradition. And I felt better when I read that for people that either have lost their ballot or for whatever reason still want to come down to City Hall, they can do that. However, what if you found out all of a sudden, 200 people want to come down? Are you prepared to be able to accommodate all that? That would be
We would have to.
right. So
We've seen an increase just in the people who come into City Hall to vote early. I'm not sure what election it was. I was reading some old coax, and it's been in the last 10 years. Like 50% of our voters that year voted early. I don't know what we had last time, but we have a pretty much a steady flow of people come into the city to vote in that month before the election
do they
date.
sign in at the counter and then come up? Is that what
And
you
they
do?
come all the way upstairs, and we have 3 or 4 booths, a handicap booth. The county trains us all on the new equipment. What is that one called? For
The Edge.
The Edge. And we all hoped, we had our fingers crossed that nobody would come in and ask us to use it because it looked very complicated, and no one did.
Okay. I guess the only other factor I had was, my first thought was, boy, this seems like this would be easy to have fraud, just because my own signature doesn't always look the same, and so it's
I'll
like,
let Christy address that.
It's actually more secure than it is at the polling place. That signature is verified, and we've all been certified in FBI training more than once. I've been there for 16 years, and I've had to take that class every 2 years. When we have a primary and general, we take a week-long class to recertify ourselves. But those signatures are checked so thoroughly, and if there's even one instance of possible discrepancy, the voter is contacted immediately to verify whether or not that voter was the person who signed that ballot particularly. When you go into the polls, you're showing your ID, and then you're signing in the book. But you could have a fake ID, I suppose, and
could.
those people at the polling
just
places are not certified to verify your signature. So it's actually more secure to vote early.
thank you.
If the city voted to go all-mail ballot, would this be applicable to national elections as well?
Applicable to what, I'm sorry?
The national elections as well?
No, it would not.
No, it's just municipal election.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, Lynn, are you asking us to decide or to recommend or discuss whether we want it brought up for a vote before 10 November? Is that what we're doing today?
If I get direction that you would like to consider it, I will bring it back on November 3rd. There's a special meeting that night. There's only one item on it, and so I'll bring a resolution that night for you to vote on, if there's some support.
Okay.
I have a question. And where are the funds coming from your department to manage this?
Well, we have a budget for elections, and the difference right now is about 9,000. But as I said, it can change because it really depends on how many additional people request an early ballot, how many additional people put their name on the permanent early voting list, and then we're paying that double fee. So it's hard for me to know.
Well, I guess this is a finance or city manager. We're in difficult times. Do we have the money?
$9,000 is not a problem.
Okay, that's what I want to hear.
How much?
9,000 is
$9,000.
not a problem.
As of right now, I mean, that could change.
Well, it could,
be less or
but you
more.
may end up on the other part,
Right.
saving some money.
Right.
So, okay.
Questions, or Vice Mayor, and then
Just,
Councilmember Holland?
on the,
No question, but I'm going to make a comment. Go ahead,
for
Rob.
it.
No.
Oh, okay. The $1.72 we pay regardless of whether somebody casts that ballot or not? Okay.
If
So
they,
that's
if
the
you
cost
request an
difference.
early ballot,
Right.
and you just don't feel like voting, we still pay that $1.72. And if it's not an all-mail ballot, we pay the 73 cents as well.
Regardless of whether they show up at the
Regardless.
polls or not,
Yeah,
we're paying
because a ballot's
73
been
cents.
printed for you,
Gotcha.
right?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I was
And the
ready.
typical, is the typical percentage of turnout, I mean, it looks like it's about double in terms of percentage of turnout when you see a city switch over.
It's roughly 50%. I brought some totals with me just to give you an idea. As of October 16th, there were 10,185 people within the city of Goodyear that are on the actual permanent early voting list. So
It's increased by
that's
1,000
quite a
since your
bit.
number up there.
Yeah.
Right. As of today, just for the entire county, we have 1.7 million registered voters. 814,070 are on the list, and we've already received 420,500 ballots back.
How many ballots have you received back already?
814,070 is the amount that we've mailed out.
Yeah.
And returned as of 4 o'clock was 420,561.
So 25% of the population of Maricopa County has already casted a vote for
Yes.
national
I have.
elections. That's impressive.
Mr.
I
Mayor?
think it,
I've got mine sitting on my,
I've
sitting
done
at
it,
home,
and I
but
think the
I'm
traditional
impressed.
way, and of course I grew up in that era, and I miss it somewhat, but I have to tell you, I think I'm a more responsible voter since we have the early ballots now, because it gives us time in the family to discuss it. You're at parties, you discuss it there. There's articles and on the email, internet, you name it, newspapers. It really gives you the time to focus, and I think it becomes more of a discussion than when you go to the ballot box and you do it. So I've found it's very good, and I actually enjoy the process.
Let me go to Councilmember Holland and then to Mr. Fishbach, okay?
I think it's encouraging people to vote, especially a lot of our younger voters that really don't have the time. They're at work and they have to take that special time off. It isn't that they're not given it, but a lot of people, get so involved in what they're doing. And I just think that we would get a much larger number. The statistics show that. I'm definitely for this.
No, she's giving you how many in
Mr. Fishbach?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to give two examples. In Fort Collins, Colorado, while I was the city manager, I think it was about 1998, the city switched to an all-mail ballot, and it had a pretty good voter participation. I think it was around 50% prior to the mail ballot, and it went up to 73%. So that's just one example. The state of Washington this year, I think, maybe it was last year, now has an entire statewide mail ballot. And in Jefferson County, where I was located, we typically got at municipal elections something like 73% return. This year they're predicting a 92% participation
That's
via
great.
mail ballot.
Pretty incredible.
That's incredible.
And that's for the whole state of Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, what the county does is irrelevant. Everybody's going to be all mail.
Correct.
But now, here, it's not irrelevant. Can you say what percentage of March votes, and that's when ours are, the county has a ballot measure? Is there,
Not very often. Typically, the county elections are in September and November, not in March and May. The only time that would happen is if it was a special election that was some kind of a ballot measure. if there were a county referendum or initiative or something proposed by one of the county departments to be on our ballot. The last county special election was the jail tax 4 years ago, and we also had the county special health care district creation of that district that was in the same year. We had 6 county elections, which I think was the year that Goodyear had to rescind the all-mail process because we had so
And
many.
that was September.
But they were in September, not
Yes.
March.
Right,
Yeah, because I don't
Right.
ever remember a county election being in March.
right.
Wait. To the point of the differences of elections, what's the legislation on when we would have to then move to a September, November primary?
Not till we have
Primary check.
160,000?
I think it's 175.
175,000, that's the break point?
Right, and it's based on population and census every 10 years. So this, in 2010, will be the next assessment, and then you'll have 10 years.
We wouldn't see that, so we'd see at least a decade probably of all-mail elections. Okay. Because then we'd automatically be back in September, November, and we'd be back in the voting booth with
That's
everybody
correct.
else during this time
Unless
period.
the
So,
county gets
Unless the
permission to
county's on
have.
mail.
Yeah, things could change.
tell you, I mean, anything that increases the voter,
Yes.
registration, education, participation, modality of our election processes, I'm all for it. So.
Mr. Souza, do you?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I'm okay with it, too.
Give her our okay.
Well, when I think that you only need a minimum of 121 signatures for this upcoming March election, that's almost disgraceful. So, so my feeling is we need to increase the participation among the public.
Well, I think we
I'm
should
voting for
have that brought to us
All right.
on the
Yeah.
November
Okay.
council meeting, on the special meeting.
I would like to add one thing. It doesn't have anything to do with elections, but Christy is a new resident of Goodyear.
I am.
Great.
A year and a half.
Welcome.
Don't forget to vote.
I won't. I could get into trouble for that.
You can't vote?
Yeah, your colleagues at Ridge.
Right. There'd be some hazing going on for sure.
Okay, other comments, discussion?
No.
Okay, we'll do reports at the council meeting and summary in the council meeting. This meeting's adjourned.